it's nice that it's actually a little small, so it can be much more informal.
We're going up.
I know.
Going up against some tough competition.
Yeah, I know.
Another breakout.
It's fine. I mean, I'd rather much
I'll actually share with Ben.
I don't know what you mean.
The switch is on top between the two.
Oh, there it is. I'm losing my voice. Getting over a cold.
Oh, so you're good at moderating. You're moderating, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just checking.
I will try.
I think the smaller people can also have a little bit more informal too.
I'm hoping for that, actually.
Because otherwise,
I'm hoping for some fist fights, food fights.
Yeah.
okay.
Referee. Moderator/referee.
Exactly. And the trainings now. Alright, so it's actually 1:41, so
Maybe we should wait for Ben to get back
That's
to
right.
the restaurant.
we can
That's
start
fine.
without Ben.
That's right behind, so that's fine.
Blindside him.
Yeah, that's almost on the counter. It's like when you come in last in the meetings, everyone's introduced yourself to the sides.
Straight back.
I personally haven't, but I'm not so sure.
It's almost the hour, right?
I'm going to share this microphone. Welcome, everyone. I'm hoping that you are here to learn more about beta testing at schools, whether it's from an educator's perspective or a corporate setting. I'm actually very privileged to be sharing a table with a group of very distinguished people, which represent a multitude of perspectives. We've got a legal perspective, we've got an instructor and educator's perspective, as well as as an ed tech startup perspective that we hope that you will find valuable as we take this topic for discussion. I'd like to poll the room to figure out how many educators we have in the room. Let's show of hands. Okay, great. And how many people are representing companies or ed tech startups? Great. So it looks like we're roughly split. So we'll actually dive right in. I'd like to kick it off with an introductory question that I'd like my panel to introduce themselves as well as tackle. And that question is, what are your best and worst experiences that you have encountered with beta testing in a school setting? And we'll start with Ben.
Okay. So I'm Ben Bertay. I'm the co-founder of Socrative. We're a data classroom teaching visualization tool. And the best and worst. So the best experience is probably we approached a district that we heard about being bring your own device a while back and offered to use our product in there as a pilot, as a learning experience for us to gain traction. And that actually turned into a district sale. And it wasn't because we knew how to sell to a district or anything, it was because the product actually got used by them, and in the process of it, they approached us to purchase a license. And to be honest, we weren't even prepared for that. But that was the best, and hasn't happened since, but it was the best. The worst experience, anytime the technology does not work the way you planned for it to go is the worst experience. So part of that beta testing is you're trying something that you've tested in your own network and you've tested with yourself, and maybe you've done scale testing on your servers and such, but the worst ones are anytime you get the feedback that you gave them a product and it didn't work the way you wanted it to, and it's what beta testing is. It's that risk, but it's an awful feeling. So I'd say that's the worst.
Imagine.
Yeah. So.
Thank you. Next is Judd.
Hi, my name is Judd Caulfield. I'm VP of Legal Affairs and Data Privacy at ConnectEDU. So my perspective on all this is really going to be coming from the legal and compliance side of things. And with respect to product testing in schools or actually any environment, the worst experience that you can ever have as legal counsel is when your client or company goes out and they just come to an informal agreement with the school and they put it out there, and then, as Ben has alluded to, maybe the product doesn't work out, maybe the expectations don't work out, and essentially your client is then developing, possibly, a bad reputation in the marketplace. So from a legal perspective, what I like to see is actual, and I know maybe entrepreneurs and schools don't like this, I actually like to see an agreement in place. Because it's not always going to be on the entrepreneur and the company to perform every single obligation under the sun in the beta testing. You're going to need to have to work with the teachers, with the school system. You're going to need to get feedback from them, and you're going to want to have certain obligations, not onerous obligations, but obligations of participation and feedback. So the agreements or the testing that I've seen where it goes horribly awry is when it's sort of done on a name and handshake, and you just go out there and it blows up. It can still blow up, but if you have the right agreement in place, if you have the right expectations, and if you're working with the school to actually develop something that's going to be useful to the teachers and to the students, if the technology isn't absolutely perfect, at least you have mechanisms in place to allow for, an update, maybe a second trial, maybe something, so that you preserve that relationship and you actually get the testing and the feedback that you want.
Great. Thank you, Judd. Shelley?
Hi, and I'm Shelley Chamberlain, and I've actually been in the K-12 education arena for, I'm not going to even say how many years, but I was a special needs teacher, I was a middle school teacher, and then I worked in Lexington and Newton Public Schools as technology director. And now I'm doing what I call my encore career, because I retired from Newton 2 years ago, and I'm working as executive director for MassQ, Massachusetts Computer Using Educators. So with that said, I'm going to pull back a little bit from my experiences working as a tech director and I always loved to beta test. So if I were here still as a tech director, I would be the one raising my hand. Yeah, I love to do that. So I'll just share quickly the worst and the best. But I think the first thing to say is what we really try to do that I think is so key is whenever we did some beta testing, it was because it was an educational need we had. We really tried to look at what we couldn't do. Did I think this product might help us do that better? And then go from there. So at least we always tried to have some kind of success, and I think you can make lemonade out of lemons if you start with that premise, even if it doesn't go right. So the worst thing we did was we did have, it was going to be testing some science simulation, and we knew we kind of needed that for kids to understand science better rather than just reading it in a textbook. What happened was we didn't really have the right equipment, and we really didn't check that out well enough ahead of time. And also our network at our school part was very network intensive, and we hadn't realized it. So we had everyone excited to do it, and then the teachers, it just kept failing. So we really didn't look, we looked a lot at the software, but didn't look hard enough at the hardware would it really support this. So that was, I guess, the worst experience. And the best was, of course, that was a few years ago now, a lot of it's web-based. So our best one was we beta tested something on how to do graphing with kids, because kids didn't understand it. And this was building in a lot of supports for special needs kids, so they would be able to use it. And it actually was also at the high school level. for that one, we actually did really check that our systems would work, and we had a couple of teachers who were willing to give feedback, and I can't agree with you more. We had, in this pilot, we really did have much more agreement set up. Who would do what, how much, the teachers had to give feedback every month to the developer had to come in, and, within a day in support if something wasn't working. So we had a much tighter agreement, and I think that really worked. And then at the end, they got to use the software that they worked on at no charge, which I know it does cost everyone down the line, but for giving all their feedback so that people felt like they didn't take all this time, use something they liked, and then they no longer had access to it.
Great. Thank you, Shelley. And Greg?
Hi, I'm Greg Schwalm. I'm a physics and astronomy teacher at Westwood High School. And my best experience with beta testing was with a company called Gather Education that I actually met at last year's version of this conference when it was Ed Tech Up. And it was a great experience because their product, which was a virtual classroom tool, was a perfect match with my classroom. It satisfied a need that I had in my classroom, and I could tell right from the get-go that it was going to mesh more or less seamlessly with my class, my curriculum, and what my objectives in the classroom were. So that was one factor that made it a great experience, but more importantly was that I was in very early. I was actually their first beta tester, which we had a couple rocky moments, but overall, all of the feedback that I provided, or a lot of the feedback that I provided, turned into adjustments and improvements with the product. And being able to see my input having a result really made me feel like the effort I was putting in was valuable, and it also made me feel like I was part of a team. And I kind of bought into this team mentality where it was no longer I was beta testing their product, but I was the first trial of our product. So that was a shift in my mindset that in the end, when all was said and done, improved the teaching and learning in my classroom. My bad experiences with beta testing, I actually don't really have any bad experiences with beta testing, and what I mean by that is that I've had lots and lots of things go wrong, but nothing that I can really identify, oh, it was the beta in particular was the problem there. Things go wrong in my classroom every day, every class pretty much, and some of them are technology related, some of them aren't. Even very well-established technologies that are out of beta, YouTube, Google, those sorts of things sometimes fail me just the same way that some of the lesson plans that I've decided, I've got a paper-based lab that I think is going to be great, and it totally fails. But I think it is important to keep in mind and not to get discouraged when things do go wrong, because teachers and students sometimes make technology out to be the scapegoat, and they say, oh, well, something went wrong in the class. I was using technology in the class. Darn you, technology, this never would have happened if it wasn't for you. And so in that sense, everything I do in my classroom is beta testing, because it's constantly buggy, just not necessarily in a technological sense.
Great. Just a follow-up question. So, and that's a great story, and I think it's probably rare that the beta test doesn't go right in all cases. So, would you say that your involvement? You mentioned that you like to be able to kind of build this team, providing lots of feedback. Do you think that that approach from an educator perspective helped the beta test be successful?
Absolutely, absolutely, because it was something where I was really thinking critically, not just about how I could improve it for my classroom, but how I could improve the product in general. And I'd come up with ideas where I'd say, oh, this feature here, I don't think I would use it, but I could imagine if I was a history teacher, it might be nice to have this. And I think that's something that they wouldn't have gotten out of me if we hadn't felt like we were all working on it together. And I think that that's something that the entrepreneurs in the room could could keep in mind is that the motivations for teachers and educational professionals are very different than the motivations for people on the business side of things. And teachers, the best teachers are teachers who share a lot and who are really passionate about collaborating and working together with their colleagues to get what's best for their students. And what that amounts to, in short, is that teachers have all kind of drank the team Kool-Aid, and they're really gung-ho about being part of a group and pushing for greatness.
Great. And actually, Shelley, I'd like to follow up with and open this question up to the rest of the panel. I'd like to talk about actually would like to see you talk about the success criteria. So you've talked about process, that the best case scenario, there was some guidelines that you set. Could you share more thoughts on for the entrepreneurs as well as educators? What are some of the criteria, the success criteria that you set from the educator's perspective?
Yeah, and I'm going to actually piggyback on what you said too. Well, as I said, first of all, it's really important to have some kind of agreement. I mean, we probably didn't make it as formal as you could say, but who was going to do what? How many times the teacher could give feedback, or would give feedback at least, and how many, and the reaction time of the developer, so that we weren't waiting, if we weren't understanding something, we weren't waiting 2 weeks to hear back because you're in the middle of the process. And I'll continue for a minute, but before I lose a train of thought, working as that team, I think, is so important, and being able to give feedback and have that feedback heard and changed. And that just doesn't even work with startups. I mean, I found that we really like to pick companies who we brought into the New England Public Schools who we felt were responsive. We knew, sometimes if they got too big, they didn't care the heck if some feature didn't work for us. But I'll use a specific example. I don't know. We used Follett for our automation system, and I've used them for many years as a wonderful example of when we found things that we really didn't think were working well, or features we wanted to add, we would actually give it to our rep, and within usually the next or two times when they did some modification. So within the year, usually, we would see some of the things we asked for. And it must have been other places we're asking too. But that really makes a difference. Because, what happens sometimes if they'll do it in the beta testing, but then once they kind of have you as a customer, they don't care we don't think they care as much. So I think that is really the key, to keep on top of that and not to get so big that, we had another company that we had their information system, and really some of the features were terrible, and they just said, well, we have Detroit Public Schools, so just because you think that feature, when Detroit asks for us, and it is on the list, but when it comes to the top of the list, 3 years from now, we'll do that for you. So I think that is really important. So I guess to go back to, some of the things, so being able to really work as a team, give feedback, and make sure that feedback is heard. And then sometimes it can't be because it's not realistic. We know that. It would cost them $4 million to do what we did, of course, and that doesn't work. And I really do think it's all about expectations. It's also about getting the right kind of teacher who really wants to do this. Because on occasion, people have been talked into doing it, and then it's not good. Because they're feeling like you're putting upon them, to do things that they don't even want to do in their classroom. So that, and the other thing is really looking at the timing of things. So, for example, if I don't know, someone mentioned about if someone wanted a beta test, but Dan Callahan, don't come in the last 2 weeks of March, because that's all MCAS testing. Really being careful about working with the educational partners, saying when is really the good time. Don't having people beta test, for example, in the beginning of a school year is terrible. Having them during MCAS is terrible. June is probably terrible. So looking at the rhythm of the school and really working that out, because sometimes you don't think that, I need this product out, next month, so I really want to do it now. But then you're just doomed to failure. So trying to find all those points, and I think you get better at it as if you do more of them. and I'm sure other people can add.
So Ben, I'd like to perhaps move to you, and then Jude will move to you for the more legal perspective. So perhaps can you expand on that and maybe talk about some of your success criteria? You mentioned that you were able to convert a beta test to a sale.
Right.
So are things like that from an entrepreneurial perspective, your success criteria, and what are the others?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, I think there's two types of beta tests that we're hearing about, and all of them do need criteria around why you're beta testing. There's the beta testing of just, we're a young company and we're trying out new functionality all the time and we want to put it live into a classroom, get hands on it, get teacher feedback on it, find out if it works the way we thought it was going to work, if the classroom experience is richer because of it. And there's that kind of collaborative experience that Greg was talking about where you're getting a team of teachers who are helping influence the direction of your design of the product. You know, I was a teacher, but I had a certain perspective as an educator, and I want to open it up to more teachers' perspectives. So you're getting that collaborative kind of group of people who are all happy to be trying something new. They're communicating with their students about the risk of it, and it's a fun collaborative growth product experience. Then on the other side, you have the one where you're working more with school administrators, and you're actually trying to convert integration into their school. And so you need to set success criteria for a couple of reasons. One, you need to set them so that you're confident for all the time you're investing in putting a product into their school that they will in turn think of you as a potential customer afterwards, and that you've talked out how much success and what type of rating do you need from your teachers in order to move forward in the sales process. So we feel confident that that's been negotiated up front, that if 85% of the teachers are happy with this, then we will move towards a sale. And we will talk weekly, and we will listen to your suggestions. And so there's that type of confidence towards the sales side where you want to make sure that you and the decision makers are in agreement on the next step later on. But there, you know, it kind of has those two. As an early startup, you only really have the one of creating a community of teachers who are helping you grow your product. The next level, is this product working as both sides think it is? That's ours.
Thank you.
Well, from my perspective, in terms of defining success and what the success criteria is, that's really a business decision. It's a business decision that's then given over to me as a legal counsel in order to implement within the agreement. So this is an experience that happened outside of Connect EDU, but with a client, is they were actually doing a campaign, and one of their marketing campaigns said that for the school they would get X amount of enrollments. All right, so the success criteria was enrollments. Well then, at the end of the campaign, the school came back and said, well, in order to get this many people enrolled, we actually had to give away this many scholarships. So those don't count as enrollments. All right, well, now you have an ambiguousness within the contract, which the parties are going to dispute over. So what you really have to think is when you're defining success is to just take some time. Don't sort of go with everybody knows what enrollment is. Take a little time within the agreement to actually define what are really the nitpicky details of those criteria. And if you want, put objective boundaries on them. So for here, it could have been, any student, enrolled, regardless of whether or not they received a scholarship, except if the scholarship exceeds, 50% of, the annual tuition. So,
Great. Thank you for that perspective. So it sounds like really kind of building coalition, getting on the same page, understanding the time frame, everything that, these are the things that educators need to work very closely with entrepreneurs. I'd like to, so we've talked a little bit about best versus experience and success criteria. I'd like to maybe start getting into something which I've talked with a number of you prior is really of interest. How do you actually traverse the school hierarchy? How do you get in? How do you get connected with a teacher? So, Ben, maybe we'll start with you, Ben, because you've done that recently.
Yeah. Well, personal network, of course. I mean, having been an educator, you find other educators who will try your product, and you go to the people you know first. And then, for us, it went through certain things like Twitter, social media. We really wanted to become a thought leader in our area, and we started posting in the arena in which we were working. So I started a blog doing different things where people would come to your site not about using your product, but because you have a way of thinking and you have a philosophy on education and you find like-minded people, and then it slowly gets into the school and you give them opportunities to understand how to use your product. in ways that make it transferable to their classroom experience. And we've gone the bottom-up approach, where we try and grab teachers and we get teachers telling teachers and they motivate each other, and then it grows through Dan Callahan's Ed Camp and they start promoting it that way, and then inevitably administrators hear about it. The other way is I read all the smart brief stuff, the ASCD articles, and I hear about what school districts just got 25,000 iPads, and then I email them, and I email them again, and I email them again, and then I ask them if they'd like to try our product for free. We have a great solution. So you just try and ping them. You get a lot less responses that way. I mean, it's just a fact, but it works sometimes.
Great. So hearing that, I'd love to hear the flip side perspective. Any tips for entrepreneurs trying to work with schools and trying to penetrate the school network?
Well, I'm lucky enough to work in a district where the administration is very supportive. So if I, as a teacher, want to implement something in my classroom, I can go up to the administration and they'll approve it. And so at least in my district, reaching out to individual teachers works. What becomes a challenge both for me and I'm sure for the entrepreneurs is not getting discouraged by the rejection rate. And there's a rejection rate on both sides here. I'll make reference to one of the keynotes from earlier in a way that's probably unexpected with Anthony Kim's mother on Match.com and whatnot. It's really hard to find the perfect match. And as a teacher who's out there looking for EdTech products, you feel kind of like the really pretty girl on OkCupid or whatever, and you get inundated by hundreds and hundreds of solicitations of companies that are saying, check out our product, it's a great product, we think will be great for you. And it's very frustrating on my end to have to sort through all of that, because some of those products are really great. But even the products that are really great may not be the best fit for my classroom, my style of teaching. Even the physics teacher who teaches the exact same course one classroom over for me, and we do the same labs and the same everything, the class dynamic and our teaching styles are such that what's perfect for me might not be perfect for her at all. So just as entrepreneurs probably feel discouraged when they keep pinging and pinging and pinging and hearing no response, it can be very daunting for educators to have to sort through and invest the time in checking out technology after technology after technology with a very low rate of finding, oh, hey, this is the technology that's going to be right for me. As a result, what I do to find technology to use in my classroom is I rely heavily on my personal learning network of other teachers, personal relationships with teachers both in my district and through the Twittosphere or whatever you want to call it these days. Educators whose opinions when it comes to educational technology I respect. And at this point, I'm almost completely unwilling to even invest the time to check out a technology unless someone I know has mentioned it to me before. Just because otherwise I'll be swamped with, I think one of the other keynotes mentioned 350 different ed tech companies out there right now. Sometimes I feel like they've all emailed me.
Great.
Multiple times.
Are there formal groups or are they personal conversations where you hear about technology amongst the educators?
There are formal groups like MassQ and organizations that are becoming increasingly formal, like the ed camps, which are educator-driven professional development get-togethers. So there's also a tremendous amount of collaboration that occurs through subject-specific listservs and professional organizations. If you're I polled my colleagues recently and asked them, where do you get your information, not just technology related, but how do you find new information about what's going on in the subject that you teach? And the number one response was, I talk to my peers that I know. And then following that was the AP listserv for each subject and other listservs and professional organization e-newsletters that were really subject specific. Because again, finding that perfect match, that one person who's going to message you on OkCupid that you're going to end up marrying and riding off into the sunset together with, that's very difficult. And as a science teacher, I'm going to have a much better chance of finding that match if I'm reading the science email lists rather than something more general for high school in general.
Shelley, and so from a more formal setting, if you can...
from a more administrative point. Well, two things. One, don't forget, this is kind of more low-tech, but there are, I think, 10 collaboratives in Massachusetts, maybe more. And a collaborative is an educational collaborative of... usually it's around a geographic area. So, for example, when I was in Lexington and Newton, I was still in the same collaborative called EDCO. So there were 20 of us, school districts in that area, that met. All the tech directors met once a month. And we often did have newer products, newer startups come talk to us. So don't forget about that, because having, in front of 10, this is the other side. So tech directors that were very, forward-thinking would love to get some and know where they could beta test things. So we often do that. So contact wherever, even, I know that it's on the web for Massachusetts, whatever the district, the collaborative, education collaboratives for Massachusetts, and you'll find there's actually an organization that's head of that too. I can't think of it right off the bat. I could probably find it. So definitely try to get talk whoever's running that collaborative to have you come in quickly with their like-minded groups. And so I think it is important for the not only the tech directors but the educational leaders, the coordinators, to be looking and seeking this out. But one thing we haven't done a good job for Massachusetts, and that's why I'm glad I came today, is we do have a big conference in at Gillette Stadium every fall where we have about 1,800 people who come, many educators, some principals, some superintendents, but a lot of educators, and we have about 130 vendors. All pretty, basically they're all pretty well established. And so what happens there is teachers run around, I like this, I like that, and then they'll come back to their school administrator, I want to buy this, I want to buy that. But we have to find another different mechanism or an additional mechanism to have startups, and I'm going to work on that, to come be able to really get in front of administrators and teachers. So I've actually talked to Eileen to see if we could do that, because I think that's a big niche that's probably because you haven't had. I mean, you've come today, but the average teacher would not probably come to this kind of thing. But if we can build it into some kind of mechanism that's already there where they're going, that would be. It would help everyone, because we want new startups from our point, from education as well. But we don't always want to go with the big conglomerates either. So figuring that would be helpful.
Thank you. I'll try to make that fall conference.
Okay, great. Yeah. Pearson hasn't come actually in a year or two. So
it's perfect time for you to join. So, Jude, actually, I'd like to explore a question with you. And so we've been talking about educators, entrepreneurs communicating, data being exchanged. I'd like to get your take on privacy concern as well as other legal aspects that the groups need to consider.
Yeah, one of the things. So I'm going to start this off with saying, in terms of data privacy and security, there are really three areas that you need to be acutely aware of. One is your own system. Two is the regulatory environment, which you're actually going to be existing in. And three are your internal policies and procedures. So before I get into all this, I want to make it clear to everybody that when we're talking about the right of privacy with respect to information privacy, I'll let them pass for a second. We're not talking about substantive due process under the 14th Amendment. So when somebody says right of privacy and we're talking about data, we're not talking about the legal jurisprudence that has grown out of Roe v. Wade and all of those other wonderful court decisions that everybody immediately links to that right. What we're really talking about, and I actually encourage you all to go back and read it, is the right of privacy as articulated by Warren and Brandeis in their 1890 article in the Harvard Law Review, which is the right of privacy. And essentially what it boils down to is the right of privacy and information privacy is the right to be left alone. So when we're protecting data, it's not that we can't use data, it's not that we can't use it for our business purposes, but we're really trying to protect the individuals, students, from being bothered by, say third parties. So what you want to have in place is you want to have a secure system. Now this is going to help you also when you're approaching clients, because clients are going to be acutely aware of FERPA requirements, they're going to be aware of COPA. So for ConnectEDU, we have a SAS 7002 audit performed on an annual basis. And all of our data is secured in an encrypted format, and we take privacy extremely seriously. So one, you got to make sure however you're dealing with data, it's going to be in a secure environment. And that secure environment is also going to be backed up by third-party, third parties who can validate that you're actually, protecting the data in the appropriate way. The second part, understanding your regulatory environment. Now, I don't know how, where everybody is existing, but when you're dealing with schools, you could be, if you're in the elementary school, you're right in COPA. So you have to know the regulatory requirements around COPA. You have to understand what PII is under COPA. You have to make sure you're managing your data internally and externally in a way that's going to satisfy those requirements. Now, when you move to middle school, too, you could be dealing with both COPA and FERPA. You'll be dealing with FERPA throughout the continuation of education. But you have to understand what those requirements are. Now, a bit of the frustrating part is the way COPA defines personally identifiable information and the way FERPA defines personally identifiable information are different. So again, this is why I just suggest that you go back and you actually just read that one article to get a grounding of what your overall responsibilities are. And then you have to stay on top of the regulatory compliance. So for those app developers, how many people have apps? How many people heard about the recent enforcement action in California by the AG against Delta, against American Airlines? Are you all aware that you're required to actually have your terms of use and your privacy policy actually embedded within your app? You can't have them linked to an external website. That is a violation of California law. Now, you all might be thinking, well, why should I care? I'm in Massachusetts. I don't have any customers in Massachusetts. Yeah. Well, the problem is that California's law doesn't apply to downloads in California. It applies to California residents. So if you have a California resident who's in Massachusetts, downloads your product, then you're now subject to California law, because every state has what's called a long arm statute. They consider that breach of their data privacy standards a tort, and they now have personal jurisdiction over you, which is about $5,000 per download for a non-conforming app. So these are things that when I hear about them, and I know we have apps in production, I actually walk across the floor to people. I like to say, all right, this is a new requirement. You have to get this out. So because a $5,000 download, if you all of a sudden have an app that starts to take place, whether it be the app development marketplace that ConnectEDU is developing, or if you're putting it on Apple, and it starts hitting, and you get 1,000 downloads. Well, it could be that could be $50,000 in California. Now, as you're growing, and as you're growing, and as you grow as a company, that target from regulators is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger on your back. So you have to know the regulatory environment you're going to be existing in. Now, the last thing is also for entrepreneurs is you want to have the right policies and procedures in place in your organization. So that means actually having a data privacy and security policy in place. And now, from my experience at Ropes & Gray, that does not mean you have a sheet that says, our policy is to comply with all HIPAA regulations, and then bind all the HIPAA regulations into one booklet. That doesn't work. You actually have to have something that you're actually going to follow, you're going to implement, and you're going to revisit from time to time throughout the year. And I'm also going to tell you why, as a growing company, you need to be concerned about these things, because as you go and you're going to be looking to seek partners, it might be ConnectEDU in our marketplace, it might be Houghton Mifflin. You might be looking to get angel fund investing, VC investing, and maybe eventually PE investing. they're going to have somebody like me do diligence on it. I'm going to look to see if you have data privacy and security policy. If you do not, I go back to my clients and I say, guess what? They don't have it. You're going to have to invest time and money to develop it. That's probably going to run you, I don't know, $200,000-$300,000. Maybe you could work with a Ropes and Gray or an Insulet or whoever these people with money are actually working with. And then they're going to come back and they're going to take that purchase price off of their offer to you. Or they're going to shift more risk over to you in any development agreement you have. So you have to make sure that you have these documents in place, you have these procedures in place. And then lastly, as you're growing, you might start to have more and more people come on board and you find yourself in a stage of rapid growth. All the people originally there might understand FERPA completely well or COPA, but you have to make sure those other people coming in understand these regulations. And they understand the regulations with respect to their job function. And so then as you hit a certain growth point, you're going to have to do annual training to individuals with respect to the regulations in terms of data privacy and security, so that you can be covered throughout your organization's growth. So you don't have some developer or some data analyst having a footfall on you and then getting into a compliance issue.
Great. Thank you for that. So we're just about out of time, ready for questions, but I do want to provide maybe 20 seconds to each panel participant to provide perhaps a key tip that they can offer from their vantage point. And we'll start with Greg.
Personal relationships are everything, both from educator with other educator in terms of hearing about technology and also having a sense of a team with an entrepreneur. So it's all about personal relationships.
And I guess I would say my big tip would be to find one place to do it very well, and then that will really help because it will be word of mouth. As I hear from another tech director, oh, that worked really well in my system. They beta tested it. Then you'll be able to do several others.
From my perspective, for entrepreneurs, make sure your intellectual property rights are protected, and make sure as you're doing beta testing, any feedback that you're actually getting from the school and any sort of updates that you might do to your product, you retain that intellectual property, so that there's no blurring of the lines there.
Yeah, I'd say make it live early and get feedback often, and of course make the relationships, and that's how you get the best feedback, is having it in a live environment.
Great. Well, thank you. At this point, we'll take questions. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question for Judd. So we're an early stage startup. We're pre-seed. We need a security policy and privacy policy, et cetera. If it costs, in the order of tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to develop, such a thing, and legal fees, how is a pre-seed startup supposed to?
There are industry groups that you can go out, and they actually have. My suggestion to you is look at the sort of credit card industry privacy policy statement. It's PCI DSS. Go to that. It is soup and nuts and bolts and everything. You might not be able to do it, but use that as a template possibly. And then, and realistically go through it and be like, all right, we don't do this. We don't have the money to do this. We can't do a SAS 2 level audit, every quarter. We don't have the money for it. But, all right, there's a security audit requirement in here. What can we do? And then, tailor it to where you are. And as you develop, keep the model, and then see how you can shift your processes and procedures internally to start meeting that model. And then when you hit it big, hire a huge law firm and have one completely rewritten.
Okay. I mean, sorry, just related to that is you mentioned keeping your IP, the intellectual property, protected when you're getting feedback. Mm-hmm. Again, if you're pre-seed, you don't have money to spend on legal fees. Maybe you filed an initial patent, but to fold that in every time you make updates, it costs money. So.
Well, I mean, you just need a standard agreement, standard contractual language. There are plenty of firms out there that aren't like the size of Ropes and Gray. There's Henderson Detmer out of the 128 belt. There's Morse Brown. There are plenty of good attorneys out there. They're going to be able to help you protect your IP. So, and this is an aside, but as entrepreneurs and startups are working with developers, this is where I see the most flip-flops. Just because you're paying somebody to develop software doesn't mean you own that intellectual property. And just because the contract says you own all the intellectual property doesn't mean you own all the intellectual property. Just because the contract says you own it and it's work for hire doesn't mean that you own all the intellectual property. Because behind all this language, there's a jurisprudence of the entire history of the United States of America with respect to copyright law. And I can tell you for a fact that work for hire, out of the 9 enumerated categories that have been articulated and that are documented, none of them is software. So that's why you need good counsel or somebody who really understands these issues in order to protect your intellectual property.
So yeah, I actually work for a company that does a lot of QA on software products. So I have a two-part question. One is, where in the process are you typically trying to get the feedback from the teachers? And secondly, how bug-free do you expect the software to be at the point when it gets into the hands of the teachers to do the beta testing?
Well, I'll take the second part of the question first. We understand it's beta, and we understand bugs are going to happen and things aren't going to be reliable. But I need to be able to expect that the software is going to work for, I would say, 90% of my students 90% of the time. And I think that you might think that, well, what about that 10% that's getting left behind? I thought we had no child left behind, right? Well, frankly, if I could effectively teach and really, really get through to 90% of my students in any given class, that would be a great class. It's a challenging thing to reach everybody. So I would say, I need to be able to see the product demonstrated. I need to try it out on my own. I need to try it with maybe 2 computers running so I can see a teacher view and a student view if it has that sort of thing. And it needs to be stable enough for the rigors of the classroom. And I forgot the first part of the question.
First part of the question is where is this happening in the process? I guess this would be more for the product teams.
Sure.
In terms of, when are you starting to get feedback from the teachers?
Yeah, we do a lot of in-house testing. We do a lot under load. But what we can't replicate is for example, the internet connection within a school environment and the drag on the system and the latency and the time from a student click to the data being transferred to the teacher app. So we send it when we're confident that everything works in the environment we've tested it. We're not going to send something with a bug because then we're not getting valuable data back from the testing environment. We've tested it in smaller scale, under load, different times a day, and we don't want to mess up relationships that we're building with the school environments because they're so valuable to us in that feedback loop. Greg can't give us good feedback if something's not working and we know it. So he said 90%. We're always 99% confident that it's going to work. If we have bugs, we're still going to fix it.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that the feature has to have all of the power behind it that we want it to have. So maybe we test something, a lighter version, earlier, but we know it works. And then we build up to the full power feature, and that's how we scale it. It's not go to the full power that's 50% working and see, because that doesn't do us any good.
Right, but the assumption is that the product they're getting is going to be as close to finished as possible.
We think it's done in that version. But what we know is we want to be able to iterate on the version of it and maybe add enhancements, not rework that build. We want it to work as we expect it to.
Okay, makes sense.
Sanjeev?
So it's a question for the educators and Judd as well. I've worked at a large educator establishment organization. I'm an entrepreneur as well. And I'll be very candid, even at the establishment, when legal came to us with COLA or requirements and changes, having led some departments, it was very hard to comply with those, even at a very large establishment. Never mind as an entrepreneur. You can imagine how challenging it might be, even to first understand, yes, we could have the legal backing of Mintz Levin or Wilma Hale or whoever. It's still compoundingly hard. So the question then for the educators is, how willing are you guys particularly when we are doing a pilot or a beta or whatever you want to call it, more likely than not, it's a free product, as you are well aware of, right? The big sale happens when we transition from pilot to something else. How willing are you guys to not have all the fancy schmancy things that Judd was talking about? Because the reality is, it's not like we don't want to comply. It's just practically hard to do so, in such a pilot-like setting as that other individual attested to as well. So it's a question for educators. How serious are you guys about, full FERPA compliance, how often you're audited for a pilot implementation?
Well, I mean, I have to say, we did look